Will this episode have a new origin, or will there be new lines on my costume? Find out after we possibly reboot on this episode of Geek History Lesson. Hello and welcome to Geek History Lesson. I am Jason Earth 2.57897 Inman.
I am Ashley Victoria Robinson. Welcome to your Mind University, because you have stumbled onto the podcast where we take one character, construct, or team from popular culture and teach you everything you need to know about them in about an hour. Sometimes we can count, but we're not doing that this week because it's a list episode, friends.
That is right, and that is why I made a stupid joke that I couldn't even get out because I was being rebooted, as we talked about in this episode, in mid-sentence, actually. And when you talk about reboots and revamps and comic books in general, we didn't want to just talk with ourselves. We wanted to bring in a good friend of the podcast. He's been here before. He also is the host of the amazing Only Stupid Answers podcast, which is a great podcast, and a writer and comic book writer himself, Mr. DJ Wooldridge. Welcome, sir.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
A bold statement. Hello.
By the way,
Hello.
By the way,
I like to come in hot. Hello.
By the way, we have not rebooted the podcast since you've been on the show.
Oh,
So,
good to know.
Yeah.
Good to know.
We're still just two podcast hosts talking about geeky stuff.
Screaming from
How
our
long-
office.
How long have you guys been going at this point?
6.5 years.
Hasn't it 6 years?
Yeah, it was 6 years in February.
Well, it's been 6 years, DJ.
2014,
See,
baby.
I can't remember our own revamps.
So I was going to respond to that, but it led me to another question. I don't remember your protocol on cursing for this show.
There is no cursing in this.
No cursing. Good to know. Then cool.
Well,
Cool.
we curse on the after show. We make people pay for the swears.
That's right.
That's good. I think that's a good strategy.
All right, so we are here to talk about comic book reboots. And now the episode's called Best Comic Book Reboots, but I'm going to caveat this episode because that's what our listeners love, our caveats.
Caveat.
This is comic book reboots / revamps, because I feel that comic book revamps are very similar to reboots, and in a lot of the lists that I consulted in researching for this episode, apparently a lot of the internet doesn't know the distinction either.
I will
Yes.
also say, and I don't think any of us are going to get too much into this type of minutia, but low-key, every time a new creative team comes on board a license, it's a soft reboot or a sequel boot, or however people like to think about it, because you are getting a new interpretation, often a new costume, a new set of rules that we're playing by. Like I said, I don't think someone's going to roll up in here and be like, oh, when the specific issues that Tom King and Mitch Gerrits did together from Batman, those are the reboots I'm going to talk about. But we are acknowledging them. And shout out to this episode's TA. This episode was requested by Lance Kaminsky, deep friend of the pod, based on a passing reference Jason and I apparently made in our Vibe episode that I don't remember.
I don't remember that either. Now, really quickly, everyone out there, usually a revamp or a reboot will inject new life into a comic book title that usually had waning sales, or maybe it was out of print. And when that happens, this new run, this new single issue can sometimes save a comic book series. Often this takes place in the form of a relaunch. A lot of re's in this episode, which can actually save companies, save characters, save entire comic book universes. And we're going to be talking about that. Now, DJ, I want to get your opinion on this.
Yes.
Overall, are comic book reboots / revamps good things or bad things? Well, how do you feel about this?
I think good things. I am of the opinion that they are good. I'm specifically of when you, like most tools, like when utilized in intelligent ways. I am of the opinion that Marvel currently is desperately in need of a reboot. I know they Marvel seems to, and its fans definitely do, take great pride in the fact that they've never had a full-on like Crisis style reboot. They've had,
they claim.
Yeah, they claim that, obviously there's like One More Day, and then there was the post Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars. But I think like everything post Secret Wars is so confusing right now. And like every time, I remember when Brian Bendis was doing his X-Men run, and the original OG X-Men team came to the present, and they did flashbacks to those the past X-Men's day-to-day lives. And it was like the 60s, and it was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't know how I'm supposed to take this. And so I think Marvel in particular is in need of a reboot, and I think it helps with something that's continuity has been going on for decades. It helps like clear the board, reset the table, and helps give creators an opportunity to come in without as much baggage to deal with.
Now, Ashley, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. Reboots, revamps, good or bad?
Tough to say, because they have proven very effective at several publishers. Valiant in 2012 had a hugely successful reboot from a...
And maybe we'll talk about it.
Maybe we will. From a company that, if at first blush you maybe would not consider for this discussion. So it's tough to beat the economics of it, but... I really love the Grant Morrison approach that everything is in continuity and you as the reader build your own continuity. But I get it. From a sales perspective, I truly get it. And I can't really fight DJ's argument so far on the Marvel of it all. And I think one of the reasons that at the time of this recording, the current X-Men universe is so good is because it kind of got a soft relaunch a few months ago.
Yes. Now, I also think that Marvel definitely should be in a reboot. I think it is. Reboots, I think, are good things. But we've also seen the opposite of reboots because DC has done it too much. They've done it too much. And I think that is the fine-edged sword, because I think a reboot or a revamp is a gun that can only be fired, especially in comic books, I'm going to say maybe once every 20 years. If you do it more than that, it is a bullet that will always miss.
I definitely agree with that. And I think it's a struggle, especially when you're a huge entity like that, to understand the difference between a reboot and an event and how they can sometimes do the same thing in terms of what you're looking for from your audience. But if we could just decide how long Batman's been Batman and stick with that for a minute, I wouldn't be unhappy about that either.
or like whether Superman has underwear on the outside of his pants, which he shouldn't, by the way. I am a staunch person that I don't think he should look like a circus strongman.
Agreed.
Thank you, DJ. All right, let's move into our list. I'm very excited to hear what our lists are.
Real quick.
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
so sorry. Going off the trunks thing, for some reason this has been on my mind recently. I think
DJ, this is not the best or worst Superman trunks episode.
Superman should ditch the trunks. I also think we can stop calling Dick Grayson. He can be Richard Grayson. It's 2020. No young person goes by Dick anymore.
I'm going to come in hot and disagree with that, because Dick Grayson is the only character who is cool enough to pull off being called Dick Grayson.
That may be true, but his name isn't even Dick. It's Richard. He could be Rick. It literally could be any variation of Richard.
Let's not even talk about Rick. Let's just move on. But DJ, I look forward to your run on Nightwing when you firmly and staunchly burn into the ground that he's Richard Grayson.
and it will definitely be literally the next writer will change it. They'll be like, nope, it's Dick again.
And that'll be me. No. All right, everybody out there, we would love to hear your lists of what you think are the top 5 comic book reboots / revamps. Remember, there are no rules. We didn't give DJ any rules. We didn't give Ashley any rules. It's basically up to your own prerogative on what you want to include and what you don't. And please send them to us on social media at where, Ashley?
At GHL Podcast over on Ye Olde Twitter and Facebook.com/Geek History Lesson.
Now, before we start this list off, I just want to remind everybody that if you are interested in any of the stuff that we talk about on the podcast, you like our attitude, you like our fresh perspective on whether or not Superman should have trunks or not, don't forget you can go pick up copies of our comic books and our books over at jasonninman.com/store. You can pick up a copy of Jupiter Jet. You can pick up a copy of my nonfiction book, Super Soldiers, about the military secret connection to comic books, and our just Ringo nominated for Best Kids Comic of 2019, Science, the Elements of Dark Energy. Go get signed copies with lots of secret swag. We throw extra prints in our books all the time, so you might get a surprise over at jasonninman.com/store. All right.
Yeah.
Ashley.
Yeah.
Let's kick us off. What do you think is the number 5 best comic book reboot / revamp?
So my number 5, I really wanted to find a sequel boot vamp that was not a big two, because the big two are the easiest ones to pull from. Marvel and DC post-Crisis on Infinite Earth are just reboot happy babies. So I looked at the scope of independent comics and the ones that meant the very most to me, and there was nothing else I could reasonably consider for this list except what I am going to call the Mark Waid Archie reboot.
Oh, yeah.
Great choice.
2013 or 14? What is time? Right about the time Geek History Lesson started. I have loved Archie since I was a tiny little baby child, like so many people of our generation. Some of my first comics were the Double Digest from the grocery store. I think it is criminal that those are still not at the grocery store, but, you know, kids these days will never know the joy of ongoing Jughead adventures like I did.
That's how I discovered Archie, and that's also how I discovered my first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics, because they did those with the Archie Turtles comics, too.
Yeah, the Archie was publishing Turtles, and then I was a big fan of the Archie Sonic comic.
And Sonic,
The Archie Sonic comics are still very good, and their Mega Bands are very good.
So what about Mark Waid's Archie reboot makes it into the top 5?
So the Mark Waid Archie reboot, which, I mean, you can't also talk about it without giving Alex Segura, grandfather of Jupiter Jet, a lot of credit for that, and Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa, because they were the editors and a lot of the people working behind the scenes to make sure that everyone hit their deadlines. But Mark Waid has been on this podcast before. I love and respect him, but was a middle-aged white man who managed to capture the energy of a diverse, modern, young group and transpose that into the Archie universe through the power and assistance, of course, of some incredible artists, Veronica Fish, who did a lot of it, and Fiona Staples, who drew the first couple arcs of his Archie title. But they took everything that we loved about Archie, even down to the silly names and Jughead's ridiculous hat that nobody wears, and only a very specific demographic of people wore at the time that Pep was first being published. And they made it cool, and they made it relevant, and they made it beautiful. The new art on those Archie books is to this day, out of this world. And at the time, I had just finished being a teenager. And so this was the first time that Archie was truly reflecting what my experiences had been at the time and the types of people. Like, I went to an art school, so we had a nice gay kid like Kevin, and Betty was as badass as they made her in the book. So Archie at that time, for me personally, it just captured this nostalgia for the person I had just been, but it gave it to me in the faces of these characters I'd known and loved for so long. And then out of that initial Archie reboot, we got Scary Archie, we got Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, and we got Afterlife with Archie. And the editorial staff dared to take this very safe 1950s golly gee property and do, dare I say, dangerous things with, edgy things that you never would have thought possible. And they, out of that, have managed to make some of the greatest arcs that we've ever had from Archie, some of the greatest independent comics that were being published. And truly just some of my favorite things to have read over the years. I've recommended a ton of different books from it on this podcast. I've put them on my best of lists. And I think in terms of indie comics, this is the one that just touches me in my heart the most, because as I matured into being an adult, so did one of my favorite properties. And I think that's why it is still, like, the new Sabrina series still kicks. Like, it's so cool that Archie managed to do that, because they could have so easily been washed away with the changing millennia.
I'm going to give full credit to this reboot for the success of CW's Riverdale.
Absolutely.
Oh, 100%.
I think that show does not happen without this reboot.
No, This was a soft version of Can We Do This? And then Riverdale took that and said, we're going to go wild.
We're going to get in the car and drive 100 miles per hour down this reboot.
You like David Lynch? You like Archie? We're going to do both. Yeah, so the Mark Waid Archie is my number 5.
What a great choice.
Thank you.
Did not make my list. Almost did. What a great choice.
Thank you.
Mr. DJ.
Yes.
What makes your top 5 for best comic book reboot / revamp / whatever?
Okay, so this is not necessarily my top 5, but I do think it's one that's underrated, and I thought it should at least come up in the conversation of reboots. I'm going to throw in there a controversial pick. I'm going to throw in there the New 52.
I don't think that's a controversial pick.
I don't.
Really?
I also don't think that's a controversial
Although
pick.
I will say, did not make my list. but I don't think it's a controversial pick.
Because here's what I like about obviously there were issues with New 52. I think like it doesn't feel like it was as cohesively planned in the same way that maybe Crisis was. And I remember in the launch, like there was rumors when Flashpoint was coming out, like, is it leading to reboot? Is it not leading to reboot? But the things I liked about it were that it not only pushed the characters. Granted, Jim Lee's designs for a lot of the costumes were similar to each other, a lot of similar line choices, but it got rid of Superman's trunks. It helped streamline the continuity at a time that it needed it. But I think more importantly, it tried to, and unfortunately this did not stick, but it tried to introduce a new variety into DC's superhero lineup, because each brand, there was like the DC Dark that had weird choices, like Resurrection Man was in there. Animal Man got a new one going from Jeff Lemire. Swamp Thing's the Swamp Thing run by
Don't
Scott
forget about
Snyder.
Demon Knights.
Demon Knights, which was amazing. I genuinely really enjoyed that book and I recommend it. It also integrated characters like Grifter and the Authority from the Wildstorm comics, and like Midnighter and Apollo, which again, unfortunately didn't stick, because I thought one of the things I really like about DC Comics, when you look at Marvel, essentially a majority of the all-time great Marvel characters were created by like 3 guys. Mm-hmm. And that benefits that brand. It helps it feel more cohesive. But what I like about the DC universe is that you've got characters like Superman palling around with a character like The Question, who theoretically shouldn't even exist on the same plane. And I thought integrating characters from like the Wildcats and stuff like that into the universe was a great way to introduce characters that already had a fan base into a universe that could use something a little fresher, a little newer, something that you hadn't really seen before in that universe. Also, there was a Static comic. And I am super excited for the relaunch of Milestone Comics, but part of me still really wants that to be a part of the main DC universe, because I think it could use those characters. It could use those characters with fresh perspectives. I would like to see Superman tackle something like the Blood Syndicate. Like, what does he do with a situation like this where they're not really villains but they're not really heroes? You know what I mean? Like, and so I liked that New 52 pushed those boundaries. And it's kind of a shame that like there's not still a Resurrection Man ongoing comic. Like some of those things that they tried didn't stick, but I applaud them for trying.
And that's a reason why the New 52 almost made it on my list as well, because you are exactly correct that the variety, the best success of the New 52 one was it introduced this whole new idea of digital and date release. At the same time it hit your comic book store, it hit a digital store, which was great. It for flat out saved DC Comics. I mean, anybody that thinks comic books would have gone down 10 years ago if not for the New 52. And then the other thing is, you are correct. The variety, the Swamp Thing title was so good, and you're correct. And I like a DC universe with that much variety, and it's something that we've lost in the modern DC universe, especially since we've lost Vertigo.
If I may, the New 52 is my number 3.
Oh snap!
Actually, I didn't notice all those lines in that collar on your clothes today.
It's very subtle. She's a good Jim Lee design. People can say whatever they want about the New 52. I have always liked the New 52. I've always been a New 52 apologist. Jason nailed it. Have whatever opinions you want. From an economic standpoint, it more than worked. Mm-hmm. And we only got Marvel Now because of the New 52.
You are correct, yeah.
So if you like Marvel Now, you better thank Dan DiDio for inspiring that. And the New 52 is not infallible by a long shot. But the New 52, for me personally, also came along at a point in my life where I had just moved to the States. I was not buying comics regularly anymore because I could not afford to. And it gave me a super easy in because I was like, great, it's all going back to quote unquote normal. I was like, they're going to get rid of Damian Wayne. What a blessing. And I went down, I was living in New York. I went to Midtown Comics and bought a whole bunch of them. And even though it is no longer the best or the easiest jumping on point, it just caught me at the right time. And I think they made a ton of really intelligent choices. One of the best Wonder Woman series of all time.
You are correct.
Yes,
Spins
agreed.
out of this, which
Court of Owls comes from this as well.
Exactly, which the movies are cribbing so hard. I just think that a lot more good came out of it than bad.
You are correct.
And you can criticize anything you want. If you say there's nothing you like in the New 52, you're kidding yourself. I really liked it. Look, in my mind, there are unforgivable things as well. I will die mad that they made Barbara Gordon Batgirl again. I just think the power of Oracle is undeniable. But Jason said the New 52 changed comics and it saved comics, the whole industry, because the health of the industry depends more on DC and Marvel than I think we would all like to believe. So it's my number 3. We still own a ton of New 52 comics, and I'm not mad about it.
It was a very exciting time. I remember, I had just, because New 52 was in 2011, and I had been here in LA like less than a year. And I went to Heidi Ho Comics in Santa Monica because it was like right down the street from where I worked at the time. And I bought every number 1 of the New 52 because it was like you were correct. It was the ultimate jumping on point. And to be honest with you, as a DC fan all my life, it was kind of exciting to be like, oh wow, everything is new again.
Except Batman and Green Lantern.
Except for Batman and Green Lantern.
Except for the 2 runs that are already doing well for them.
Yeah, basically.
No, I think it's a great choice. Again, I actually found it was hard for me. Archie almost made my list.
Yeah.
And the New 52 almost made my list.
No, it's a blessing when you're like, all these great things almost made my list, because we've also done lists where you're like, how am I going to put 5 things on this list?
Exactly.
All right, but Jason, now is the time. What is your number 5?
You want to speak about controversial?
Oh, snap.
My number 5, I am predicting I am going to get so much flack for.
Rot World.
Well, that's not really a reboot, but okay.
Also, it's a pretty good story.
It is a good story, actually. Comes from the New 52.
Yeah.
No, mine is one that a lot of people don't give enough credit for. And it's not all that successful at the time. But when you look at everything that was birthed from it, it is one of the most successful reboots of all time. And I am talking about, and you have to say it with gritted teeth, and I'm saying you have to say it with gritted teeth, an angry expression, tiny feet, and 25 teeth in your mouth. Heroes Reborn!
Oh, dang.
I was going to say, Jason is an unabashed Heroes Reborn lover. We've talked about it on the show before. You were saying that a lot of people don't like it, and I wanted to say, except for the people who worked on it.
Yeah.
Because Rob Liefeld loves it.
So now, Heroes Reborn, everybody out there, was the year-long crossover where it was a recreating and updating of the Marvel Comics' biggest superheroes. It took place right after the Onslaught event, where the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, Doctor Doom, Iron Man, the Hulk, and many others were like transported into this pocket universe.
I still have that issue in my long box.
Oh, dude, I have every issue of Heroes Reborn, Fantastic Four still in my long box. So the idea was, at the time for Marvel Comics, Marvel was selling Spider-Man really well, and they were selling X-Men really well.
Hey, just like right now and always.
And Captain America, the Avengers, Iron Man, I know all the leaders of the movie franchises were barely selling. They were barely crossing, at that time, at the height of super comic sales, barely crossing 20,000 an issue. So they reached out to Jim Lee of Wildstorm Studios and to Rob Liefeld of Extreme Studios and said, hey, if we gave you 4 titles, would you just take them on? And you control 100% of the creative content. And they did. Rob Liefeld took on Captain America and the Avengers. Jim Lee took on Fantastic Four and Iron Man.
That's wild to think about. Jim Lee doing Fantastic Four. Like now, in the times, it's weird to imagine Jim Lee doing Fantastic Four.
Now, here's the thing. To this day, it has never been broken. Rob Liefeld's Avengers #1 is the best-selling Avengers debut of all time.
That's bananas.
It has not been beaten. I think it sold like 400,000 copies.
So let's get Jupiter Jet to 400,001.
Oh boy. So it worked. The sales of all of these books skyrocketed over 100,000. The interest was huge. It changed up the art styles on a lot of these heroes because Marvel did leave these people alone. And I will say, as a person who really had no interest in the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, any of these characters, I was just getting into comic books when this hit. And I will say that it was the ultimate jumping on point. My love of the Fantastic Four comes from Heroes Reborn because I read the Heroes Reborn run and I was like, is there more to these guys?
It's crazy to hear you say that because in our Fantastic Four episodes, you speak so passionately about them. And one of the things that I always admire about you is the way you speak about Sue Storm. Like, you are such an advocate for how amazing she is.
It comes from this run. It comes from Heroes Reborn. Now, nowadays, if you go back and read Heroes Reborn, it has not aged well. The art,
What?
The art looks mainly
nothing does.
Nothing does. The art looks okay. It looks pretty good. There's some
It's 90s AF.
There's some amazing Jim Lee Fantastic Four shots. But overall, I will fully admit that the stories are not great. But Heroes Reborn revitalized their sales and led to the next revamp, which it led to Heroes Return, which led to Mark Waid coming back to Captain America, Kurt Busiek and George Perez taking on the Avengers, which
Jason's favorite Avengers,
which I state is the best Avengers run of all time. Kurt Busiek taking over Iron Man, and Chris Claremont, X-Men legend, getting a very long run on Fantastic Four. And all the sales post Heroes Reborn continued. And I would argue that without Heroes Reborn, there would be no MCU. There would have been no Ultimate Universe, which is also another huge imprint for Marvel. I also will put this down right now. The Heroes Reborn Fantastic Four costumes, still my favorite Fantastic Four costumes of all time.
I will also jump in on this as someone who's never read Heroes Reborn. Rob Liefeld's update of Bucky Barnes. Adorable.
Ricky Barnes.
Love her.
Yep.
She rocks. If you're casting, please hire me.
Yes.
Well, now, hold on, right? Quick question, because as you're talking about it, I had to bring up the classic art because just to remind myself. But now I don't remember. If I'm putting you on the spot a little bit. In the lineup, there's this guy with the sword, and I can't for the life of me figure out who it is.
Oh, Mr. DJ. He is classic 70s Avengers member, redesigned by Rob Liefeld, the Swordsman.
Oh, there you go.
Duh, it's right there in the name.
Didn't need to try that hard.
I mean, if you Google the art, and this might be
I'm going to share some of this art.
This might be something fun to share on the social media. Rob Liefeld also added redesigned Hawkeye.
Yes, he did. I can see that.
And he gave Hawkeye a brown costume with almost full-on Wolverine comic book mask pointy tips.
It's because he's trying to make him look like a hawk. Because Wolverine's greatest costume, right, is the brown costume, which is based on the Wolverine markings.
No, Ashley. Incorrect. The reason why Wolverine is in brown, and the reason why Wolverine has Wolverine, why Hawkeye is brown and why Hawkeye has the Hawkeye tips.
Yeah.
Fun fact, because 90s image comic book creators are very, let's say, controversial.
Sure.
Mr. Rob Liefeld did not get to finish his 12 issues of Heroes Reborn. He only made it 6 issues in before he was fired.
Yeah.
He never got to reveal.
Depending on who's telling the story.
And he said this in several other places. That Hawkeye was not Clint Barton. That Hawkeye was James Howlett, the Wolverine.
Oh.
Jeez.
And it was his intention, like somewhere in the 12 issues, to have him pull off his mask, and you were going to find out that it was Wolverine.
I'm sorry, Mr. Liefeld. I think you are due a lot of respect for your contributions to comics. That's a bad idea.
Well, I also will say this, because we would love to have Rob Liefeld on this podcast.
Anytime.
He actually has a 4-part episode series on his own podcast called Robservations with Rob Liefeld, where he goes into detail about this whole event. It's quite actually fascinating to hear the man who helped make this event talk about the event. But Heroes Reborn is my number 5. And also, my university students, I'm just warning you, I don't know if you're looking at the time counter right there. This is gonna be a long episode of GHL.
We'll talk less. That'll be fine.
All right, Miss Ashley. What is your number 4?
My number 4 is more of a side vamp.
Whoa, what is a side vamp?
Well, it's not fully a revamp. It is when a new creative team came onto this series, but their impact and the amount of things they changed and updated, and the fact that they made this comic as popular as they did and as critically acclaimed as it did is why I wanted to add this to my list. And this is the Jason Aaron Thor run, encapsulating God Killer, Odin's son, Lady Thor.
So you count the stuff before Lady Thor?
Yes, I do.
Okay, interesting.
With his, I would start with like him and Esad Ribic, book number 1.
So the Marvel Now revamp of Lady Thor,
because Thor is a character who is beloved now because we're all like, I mean, Chris Hemsworth is great to look at and
Yes,
he can
he
deliver a joke.
Yes, he can.
But
why don't you marry him, DJ?
You could be a nice kept man.
Hey, listen, I wouldn't knock it. He's making that Marvel money. I wouldn't knock it.
Yeah, truly. But Thor was a character who, before Jason Aaron came on, unless you were a diehard Thor fan, we were pretty much like, yeah, he was a horse for a bit, and there's a frog, and it's pretty much the Simonson's run on it. And the Straczynski stuff was everything that was very lauded about Thor. I remember when I had never read Thor, when the Thor movie came out, I loved it because I love everything Kenneth Branagh touches. And I remember going to a comic book store and they were like, I can't really recommend you a Thor book as a new reader because they were like, there's not a ton of really accessible Thor. And that is what I think Jason Aaron does so well. Not only does he present you with the basic elements and the characters that you are familiar with from the film as your beginning players, but he ties a lot of it into like the deep cut weird Norse mythology and then uses that to start creating his own mythology. The God Butcher story is awesome. And it really feels like it comes out of the same tradition that a lot of those Norse myths, holy smokes, that originally inspired Thor came from. And then I remember when Lady Thor was announced, and I think I tweeted out that I thought it was pandering.
I think we all did.
Yeah, I felt similarly, yeah.
And then we read it and we're like,
fantastic.
I was wrong. I apologize. Mr. Aaron, I volunteer as tribute to die for this character. I'm so thrilled she's coming to the screen. Like everything that he has done with Esad Ribic and the subsequent artists who have come on to work on it additionally has pushed this character and then his sort of respective franchise forward. Everything that he's done allowed us to get the weird Loki miniseries that people love so much and has gone on to inspire the movies that it was inspired by. And I just think if you look at the scope of Thor, you can't ignore it. The books freaking rock. And again, they're another super easy jumping on point if you're only a fan from the movies or you're maybe less familiar with Thor. And I think that's going to be a running theme for us is we're like, yeah, this is a great way to enter into this character.
I want to make an observation here, which I think is quite astounding, actually, is that you, for your number 4, what a lot of people don't really realize is that the Jason Aaron Thor run is sort of a revamp of Thor back to comic book Thor. Because because Marvel had seen the Thor movie come out, and then all the Thor comics just kind of became Thor in the MCU. Yeah. And Jason Aaron was the one that was like, no. There's this really great Walter Simonson run from the 80s that is like steeped in Norse mythology. That's what I'm going to revamp Thor back to. And I think I would argue, created a run that is equal to Walter Simonson, if not better.
I would definitely say that. And this is also, look, Jason Aaron has been around for a long time. He did some incredible independent comic books, but I would say Thor is also the run that made him a superstar.
Yep.
And is the reason that he is now like almighty Jason Aaron. So
awesome.
That's
Great.
My number 4 is Thor / Lady Thor / Marvel Now Thor.
That's great.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. DJ, who is your number 4?
So for my number 4 was also a Marvel character. I briefly looked at possibly mentioning J. Michael Straczynski's Thor run.
I would consider that a revamp as well.
Yeah, because I was always under the impression growing up that Thor sucked.
Me too. Don't feel bad about that.
Yeah,
How doth they say that?
Yeah, I just thought he was lame, and then I picked up a couple issues of J. Michael Straczynski's run because people were saying it was great, and I was like, oh, Thor can be cool. Like Thor can actually be good. In the right hands, Thor can be good. But that's not what my number 4 is. My number 4 is what I would say is a reboot. Possibly it is a revamp of a character, but it is when Ed Brubaker made Bucky Barnes Captain America.
Heck yes.
I like it.
All due respect to Steve Rogers, I think Bucky is a more interesting Captain America.
Yes.
I think his costume designed by Alex Ross is really cool. And I've got to be honest, all due respect to Sam Wilson getting the shield in the movies and everything. But part of me couldn't help but be like, but Bucky, you know what I mean? Like if for no other reason that Sam is fine as Falcon.
Look,
Falcon
I'm
is
just going to throw this out there, DJ. Sorry to interrupt you.
Please.
I actually think, and this, people 2 years from now can listen to this and they'll laugh at me. But my secret theory is that we're going to come out of Falcon and Winter Soldier with 2 Captain Americas.
That actually wouldn't necessarily surprise me. Although I don't love it when there's like multiple versions. Like the fact that there's two Spideys in the MCU right now. It's like Miles should get his own universe, like where he doesn't have to compete with Peter Parker. He just
as a
is
person
Spider-Man.
who likes every character in the Flash family just being named Flash, I disagree with both of you.
All right. But for me, this was a moment like I just thought it was a great reboot of what we understood of the character. It complicated who Captain America was. It was the idea of living up to this legacy for somebody who was not a good person. Like the Bucky's journey from being, in fact, I was going to say Cap's sidekick, but in Ed Brubaker's run, it's established that it's less his sidekick and more of his wet works guy. Like all the stuff that we don't want Cap doing, that's what Bucky does. And so Bucky in the comics under Ed Brubaker was not a good dude. And so the idea of trying to become better, trying to live up to what Captain America represented, I think was not only important then, but it's important now because this idea of America being an idea and not living up to that idea, but trying, I think, elevated that character. And I this is one of those characters that it's like, I wish Wally West was still the only Flash. I wish Bucky was still the only Captain America because I feel like there's still mileage to get out of that story.
I agree with you, DJ. What a great choice. I never would have considered that for this list, but I do love that storyline.
We are also a group of people who love our legacy characters here, so I'm not surprised that we're like, yeah.
I have the Bucky as Cap action figure, so...
Is that the one that's in our freezer?
No, that's the regular Captain America refrigerator. By the way, for everyone out there, we have a Captain America Marvel Legends action figure in our freezer because Cap should always be frozen.
Cap should be frozen. You got to keep him frozen. Keep him fresh.
Yeah, it's
He's
the only
been
way.
in there for literal years. All right, Jason, what is your number 4 best reboot?
Well, this is a true reboot, and this is also one that is not a big 2 company. I actually think one of the most successful reboots of the last 20 years is Valiant's 2012 reboot.
Heck yeah.
Now, Valiant, of course, is one of these publishers throughout the 1990s that I'd always see in like really bad ads in Wizard magazine. Jim Shooter, great creator of the Legion of Superheroes, was their editor-in-chief for a long time. And, they had like various characters like Turok the Dinosaur Hunter and Solar, Man of Adam, Bloodshot, Exo Manowar. And they were kind of around in the 90s, but then the company died and they disappeared. I think because most of those 90s Valiant comic books just were not cohesive. They really didn't have a great art style to them. And I kind of think that, they just didn't, they were kind of mediocre. They didn't grab anybody's attention. Now, I think that all changed when Acclaim Publishing picked up Valiant. And in 2012, they launched this Summer of Valiant. And they hard rebooted, New 52'd, Crisis on Infinite Earths, whatever you want to call their universe. And to be honest with you, I think it was the best decision they could have ever made. They started all of them on ground zero, and they kind of cooked the whole universe around who I think is their best character, Exo Manowar, which if you don't know, he is a character that is... He's not a caveman, but I'm going to basically describe him as a caveman. He's basically from pre-modern technology times. He's from the pre-year 1000.
Prehistory.
He's from prehistory, and he basically gets in control of an alien suit that is basically an Iron Man suit.
Yeah.
And it's the idea of like, what if Conan the Barbarian had Iron Man's armor?
I also like to describe Exo Manowar as like, what if Captain America, Thor, and Iron Man were the one dude? What if it was the one character all in one?
That is a great way to describe it. But they baked it around Exo Manowar, and through that they introduced Bloodshot, Archer and Armstrong, Harbinger. They kind of like made the rest of their universe, and it really, really worked. Robert Venditti is the guy who writes that Exo Manowar run, and he does like 50 issues. And I'm going to tell you, it is one of the best superhero comic books of the 2010s. It is such a great read. It is so fun. Now, I think Valiant has been less successful because they've technically revamped Exo Manowar twice since 2012, which I think kind of killed all their thunder. But I really wish they would have maintained this universe, because I will say that Valiant from about 2012 to 2015 was pretty hot. And it was a pretty exciting time to read Valiant. And that is why it's my number 4.
Recommendations from that line. Big fan of their Quantum and Woody run. The revamp there
every Quantum
great.
and Woody series is great.
And there's a recent Ninja K book. It's the character's Ninjak, but they kind of retooled him to be Ninja K.
Oh, interesting.
And that run was really good as well.
Nice.
Also, the Bloodshot movie Blue.
It was one of the first things that we watched in quarantine, and the amount of joy that I got watching Jason watch that movie just cannot be measured. That movie's a goddamn gift. Thank you for making it.
All right, Ashley, what is your number 3 best comic book
my
reboot?
number 3 was the New 52.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to
snap.
respectfully say thank you for letting me scream about it. And hey, DJ,
favorite New 52 title?
Oh man,
You had to pick one.
off the top of my head, I'd probably say Wonder Woman.
Oh,
I just
so
think,
good.
I just think
Good choice.
Wonder Woman was so strong. Cliff Chang's art is
Yes.
iconic. Yeah.
Great.
I wish they'd kept. I love Greg Rucka, but he got the run almost immediately after that, and he just threw all of it in the trash. Like
Yes.
he just like, and the way they revamped the Greek gods in that story is almost like a crime families.
They're cool. They look
It's so
cool.
interesting. It's so interesting. Anyway.
All right, DJ, what is
yes.
your number 3?
My number 3 is another legacy character. Sorry, I have a type. For me, and I know I think I'm with the right crowd with this one. But another character that if you'd asked me when I was a young person that I thought was lame was Green Lantern. I didn't care about Green Lantern. And then they made Hal Jordan a villain, and he murdered all the other Green Lanterns. And then the last remaining ring went to a young artist named Kyle Rayner, and I thought that was so cool. I thought like the idea of an artist getting a ring that can create anything he imagines was such a great take. And to this day, I will defend Kyle Rayner as no offense to Simon Baz or Jessica Cruz. I do have a special place in my heart to Joe from Far Sector. I think she's great.
Janelle Monáe, Green Lantern.
Yeah, like I just think that run's really cool, and I think I like the secret with a lot of comic characters is the costume cool, and it's like the Far Sector Green Lantern Joe's costume is so cool. Anyway, but the only costume that might be cooler is Kyle Rayner's, in my opinion, and
Designed by the great Daryl Banks.
And I just think I think it was a smart place to take the character. I like the idea. The idea of him being like the last Green Lantern was so good. They redid it with Nova, and they've redone it with like a bunch of other like groups of spacefaring heroes. And it's another one of those. It's like Green Lantern Rebirth by Jeff Johns is great, but part of me wishes Hal was still bad, or dead. Either one.
I'll vote for dead.
Yeah.
Although I think The Green Lantern, which is being published right now, is super cool.
Agreed. But I'm a huge Grant Morrison fan, so it's like that. You're going to get me anyway.
Yeah.
DJ, that is a great choice. As we said many times in this podcast, directly over my desk is the retailer poster for Green Lantern number 51, the first issue of Kyle Rayner, the Emerald Twilight, as they called it.
Yeah.
And I agree. I love that run, especially because they were like, the sales on Green Lantern were lagging, and they were like, we need to get a new jumping on point. And it really worked. It worked for me. That was how I found out about Green Lantern. It's so interesting that you picked that for your number 3, because my number 3 is a Green Lantern run, but it is not that one. See, I think my number 3 is Green Lantern Reboot. Green Lantern Rebirth, excuse me.
Oh, wow.
Which is not technically... Now, I am a Kyle Rayner fan. I love Kyle Rayner. And when they first announced that Hal Jordan was coming back, I thought it was the worst idea ever, because I was totally behind Hal Jordan. I was 100% behind Hal Jordan being a villain. But when I read Green Lantern Rebirth, and the way it relaunched many elements of the Silver Age, yet picked up all the elements of Kyle Rayner and combined them.
Yeah.
I thought it was perfection. I thought, because everybody thought they were going to kill Kyle Rayner. It seemed the most obvious solution, because why else would you need Hal? And the way that Jeff Johns kind of redesigned the entire Green Lantern mythos to make everything work is genius. Without Green Lantern Rebirth, we get rid of the yellow impurity. We introduce this idea that there are other colored cores out there. There's a Sinestro core, there's a Blue Lantern core, there's a red core. It leads to the uber popular Sinestro Corps War. It leads to one of the greatest DC events of all time, Blackest Night. Without Green Lantern Rebirth, we do not get the 2011 Green Lantern movie. We do not get the Green Lantern animated series. And also a lot of
Green Lantern animated series is really good.
It's one of the best. And also a lot of people forget this, but before the New 52 and our first couple of years in the New 52, the reason they didn't reboot the Green Lantern title when they did the New 52 is because Green Lantern was one of DC's top 5 selling books.
Yeah, they almost did a horrible thing and replaced Wonder Woman with him.
Yes. For that amount of time, Green Lantern was the third member of the Trinity, not Wonder Woman, because his title, because of Green Lantern Rebirth, was selling like hotcakes. And I think for me, that's the reason why I had to put it as number 3, because I was initially against it, but it has impacted everything with Green Lantern going forward. And I actually think in a positive way. It has actually shown me a way that that you can have Kyle Rayner, you can have Hal Jordan, you can have John Stewart, you can have Guy Gardner, and the universe can still work. Although I do think there are too many Human Lanterns.
I agree.
I think that the brilliance of Green Lantern Rebirth is that it showed you, oh, no. Just like what they've done with Far Sector, you just have to put them in their own little corners and make them different. And then that way they all work. Because it is a core, not just a Green Lantern. And that's why Green Lantern Rebirth is my number 3.
I think that's a solid choice. And I think one of the things that impressed me, even though I am a hardcore Kyle Rayner guy, it's hard to deny the effectiveness of what was done in Rebirth and the elegance of how do you explain away all the heinous stuff that Hal Jordan did. And the parallax parasitic entity was a really elegant way to do that. And I don't know if they'll be able to come up with something else elegant when they try to fix what's been done with Wally in the past couple of years.
Agreed. All right, Ashley, we're down to your number 2.
My number 2 is something that I was introduced to by Jason Inman. Like so many things we talk about
Heroes
on
Reborn?
this podcast. It's not Heroes Reborn.
Okay.
I already said I have never read Heroes Reborn. In fact, you told me not to read Heroes Reborn the last time we chatted about it. But this actually comes out of that similar ethos, and this was right after Marvel filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, because I think they were like, we got nothing, fam. If you have a great idea, let's do it. And thanks to that mentality and Jimmy Palmiotti, we got Marvel Knights. And Marvel Knights,
great choice,
in many ways comes directly out of Heroes Reborn.
And I think it happens because of Heroes Reborn.
And is kind of the ultimate universe before that was a fully formed thing. And it asks, what if these characters were created now, or what if they had a more modern sensibility to them? And I used to say that the New 52 is comics for the Xbox generation, and Marvel Knights is in that very same way, because it takes these characters and puts them in much more mature circumstances, and it examines what would happen. It led to an all-time great Daredevil and Spider-Man. Like, the Spider-Man Marvel Knights is one of my favorite bar none Spider-Man stories of all
Written
time.
by Mark Miller.
Yeah, yes. So many people who were either huge at the time or went on to become hugely powerful in comic books came out of this. It also led to one of the best Black Widow stories, which introduced Yelena Belova, who Florence Pugh is going to be playing in the upcoming Black Widow movie, and was going to be a book club until that movie was shoved back in its release date. And I think when we look at the scope of Marvel, I think Marvel Knights is the one that kind of, and Max a little bit as well, which is kind of in that same vein.
Yeah, and I think Max happens because of Marvel Knights.
It spins directly out of Marvel Knights. It kind of pushes Marvel Knights a little bit further than Marvel Knights went, but I kind of think their cultural impact is swept away when they are bookended by Heroes Reborn and the Ultimate Universe.
I think the reason why for that is because Marvel Knights is not really a reboot. It's more of an imprint. But it is definitely a revamp.
It's set in the 616.
Yes, it's set in the main. They never changed the continuity. But like without Marvel Knights, we would have never had, I forget the year it came out, that Ben Affleck Daredevil movie, because Marvel Knights Daredevil like launched Daredevil's popularity, and we also forget it launched a hero that would not have had a movie a couple of years ago, one of the best superhero movies of all time. Marvel Knights is also responsible for revamping Black Panther.
Yes, that's very
because
true.
the modern Christopher Priest run happened as part of Marvel Knights.
You're absolutely right. Good pull that I did not have in my notes.
It's a great run.
So if people have especially if people have never checked out Marvel Knights, figure out what your favorite hero was doing at that time and check it out. It'll change your life.
Speaking of Marvel Knights, was it that or Max that was part of Garth Ennis's Punisher run?
A little bit of column A and a little bit of column B.
It starts in Knights and then gets moved over to Max and gets really violent.
Yeah, so his Punisher run in Marvel Knights is kind of PG-13, and it's really good. That's where the Welcome Back Frank comes with.
Yeah, great run.
Then,
I mean, arguably the best Punisher run of all time.
It is. And then, he pushed it over to Marvel Punisher Max, and that's where it becomes Frank Castle, 65 years old, and still this murderous person. And he did another 50 issues as Punisher Max. So, I think Punisher Max is better, but I honestly would consider the run all the same. Like, I would consider the Punisher Marvel Knights and the Punisher Max as, the same series.
Yeah, well, they're packaged together the same now in their collections.
And I just got to say, just while we're on the subject, I think Punisher Born, which goes back to him and Nam.
I love that story.
Yeah, it's my all-time favorite Punisher story, and I think something I like about Garth Ennis's run is his realization that Punisher's not a good dude. Punisher's a bad person.
He is a very bad person.
Yeah.
Great choice, Ashley. I will say Marvel Knights almost made my list as well. But
I kind of thought that was the one that I pulled that might have been on your list.
No, because you'll see.
That's fine.
Mr. DJ,
yes.
Who makes your number 2 for best comic book reboot / revamp / reimaginings?
You guys will have to let me know whether this is a reboot or a revamp, but I had to put in there one of my, I think we were talking about the X books a little bit, and I had to put my all-time favorite X run, which is Rick Remender's X-Force run.
I consider it a revamp.
Yeah, and we are kids of the 90s, right? So we're all familiar with, we mentioned Rob Liefeld earlier, and all the pouches and the guns and the tiny feet and that stuff.
And the belly tops inexplicably.
All that stuff. And that made an impression on me as a kid. Like, I'm a big Sunspot fan to this day. Again, mostly just because he has a really cool design. But Rick Remender's revamp of X-Force, and specifically the inclusion of Phantom X, who was introduced in Grant Morrison's Fantastic X-Men run, really elevated what that team could represent, because that was I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that was at the time Cyclops was in charge, and so essentially X-Force was the X-Men Wet Works team.
You are correct. Yeah, they were the assassin squad.
And spoilers for that run, please go pick it up. The opening arc deals with them trying to take down a reborn Apocalypse, who is a child, and Phantom X makes the decision I'm not going to let this escalate, and he essentially takes out a little kid, and that sets the tone for what this series is trying to accomplish, and its exploration of just the morality of being a part of a group like this. And I think if I were to peg an all-time X-Men comic, it would be this run on X-Force.
Nice. I think it's a good choice. I think it's an excellent choice.
You want to round us out with your number 2?
Yeah, so my number 2 is a revamp that also debuted in the 2000s. The Ultimate Universe. Ultimate Marvel. Now, a lot of people forget about this one. I would consider this to kind of be a reboot, but this is where Marvel decided to do its own separate universe, its own little imprint, and relaunch Ultimate Spider-Man and Ultimate X-Men. Ultimate X-Men written by Mark Millar, Ultimate Spider-Man written by Brian Michael Bendis. And the idea is to reboot those characters as if they would have been created in the year 2000. So suddenly Peter Parker is now 15 again. He's not a photographer. He's a web designer. Wolverine has a soul patch. And it actually kind of reinvigorated the Marvel Universe. It eventually led to The Ultimates, which is their revamp of the Avengers, as titled, written by Mark Miller and drawn by the amazing Brian Hitch, where it put the Earth's Mightiest Heroes in a realistic, modern-day setting, a dark, gritty approach. It was the first time in the entirety of Captain America's history where he was written as a soldier. Mm-hmm. He shot guns. He picked up M16s. He would stab people. Which I always had before, and as a military member, I always had a problem with Captain America, that he was too good. And the Ultimates was the first time where I was like, oh, here's a realistic soldier Captain America. And then the Ultimate Universe created this change in the Marvel Universe. It became so popular and it sold so well that the regular 616 titles started stealing from the Ultimate Universe.
Yeah, and then their cinematic universe stole everything.
I was getting to that, actually. Now, one of the biggest changes of the Ultimate Universe, of course, is Black Nick Fury, who they decided to draw as Samuel L. Jackson. Mm-hmm. And then you can literally look at the Ultimate Universe as the precursor to the MCU. The Marvel Cinematic Universe Avengers are the Ultimates.
Yep.
It is beat for beat the Ultimates.
I mean, Cap is a little softer.
Cap is a little softer, but
a little less racist.
A little less racist.
A little less racist.
And one of their early, but in that movie, like one of their early enemies is the Hulk. That's what the whole first arc of the Ultimates is. But it's interesting because the Ultimates had, the high school student Peter Parker, young Mary Jane. They created a young Fantastic Four that were like sort of a think tank, which is what we eventually saw in Fan Four Stick.
Fun costumes with that too.
Fun costumes with that as well. And then after the MCU and the 616 had kind of pilfered everything they could out of the Ultimate Universe, the Ultimate Universe wasn't done. Mm-hmm. The Ultimate Universe created a character that I think is going to have more of an impact in 21st century Marvel than any other character. And that
Who could it be?
And that is young Miles Morales, Black Spider-Man.
The lead of the best Spider-Man movie?
The lead of the best Spider-Man movie.
The best superhero movie?
And I think, without a doubt, will show up in the next live-action Spider-Man movie.
The reason so many people are ordering the PS5 before the bugs are worked out?
So, again, it was... Usually when you think about reboots, you want to push the envelope, but you want to introduce new ideas that are exciting and fresh. And I think that bar was definitely crossed by the Ultimate Universe. The Ultimate Universe reboot changed the Marvel Universe forever. The movies, video games, television, everything. And that is why it is number 2.
And it's funny with the Ultimate Universe, like you could look back at pretty much any major Marvel property post 2000, even Sam Raimi's original Spider-Man movies, and they're kind of a hybridization of the classic 616 and the Ultimate Comics.
It is
like they're kind of like they pick from both. Like even this Spectacular Spider-Man cartoon is kind of like, here's a little bit from 616, here's a little bit from the Ultimates.
I think it's because it was just like the Ultimate Universe was this refresh. It was. Again, they looked at the initial design of the universe was, what if Spider-Man was created in 2000, in the year 2000? And you can kind of see that across the board with even the fact that Captain America's costume in the Ultimates is a soldier's uniform with a Kevlar helmet, which is exactly what the MCU does. Yep. But when you think about that, Captain America wearing a Kevlar helmet, you're just like, that's genius, because he would be used to wearing a Kevlar helmet, but it works so much for that design. And you're right. Like, it kind of made all the concepts in the Marvel Universe palatable for adaptation.
Yeah. And I will say, when I mentioned earlier that I think Marvel needs to do a reboot, the comics, I think part of that is bring the Ultimate Universe back and basically let that be Miles' universe. Like, let that be where Miles is the Spider-Man.
I agree.
And doesn't have to compete with anybody else.
I agree. Miles should be in his own universe, but we digress. All right, Ashley, we are here. The number 1 best comic book reboot. What do you think?
So this is one I actually think I'm going to get the most flack on, but don't tweet me.
Is it Heroes Reborn?
It's not Heroes Reborn. It's a DC reboot. It's a DC revamp. It's a DC revitalization. It is a DC reintroduction of a Silver Age team that came and went. And then this book for the next 10 years proceeded to be their best-selling comic versus Marvel's best-selling Uncanny X-Men, and that is the New Teen Titans.
Cool.
If you've stuck around this podcast for any amount of time...
The George Perez Marv Wolfman run?
Yes. You know that the Teen Titans are my favorite super team of all times. They have basically all my favorite legacy characters who went on in the 90s, some of them to take on their own mantles or to become the greatest Flash who ever flashed.
Agreed.
And... look, this run started in 1980, which means it was gestating and is very heavily influenced by the 1970s. There is some problematic stuff in here. Some of the treatment of Donna Troy are questionable at best. Beast Boy, who for me is a beloved character, says some unfortunate things. However, if you can set aside the fact that we didn't respect women as much in the 1980s as we do now, and that's really saying something because you still owe us a lot, the story is really good, and the teen superhero aspect is so well utilized. Everything that works about Teen Titans ultimately gets transposed and grown up into Crisis on Infinite Earths, which when we did our best events and crossovers episode, we tabled because it's the best event or crossover that has ever been. It is the best clean slate we ever got. It allowed a whole generation of characters to be defined by stepping out from behind the cape or out of the shadow of their elders. It gave them personalities, and for the time, it was pretty diverse. There's 2 females on there. There's an alien. We have a black leader of the team, or a man who becomes one of the leaders and goes on to mentor the next generation. Cyborg is so great, they put him on the freaking Justice League after the New 52, and he was in a movie and is now on a television show. The impacts of this run echo through our popular culture. We have Teen Titans. The Teen Titans Go team is this team. It's a little pared down. There's not as many Wally Wests and Garths on it as there are in the comics, but
they do show up in like an episode or two.
They do, and every time they do, like in the original series when they did Titans East, and Garth showed up, I was so happy. Arsenal's a real butthole, but so many things that my generation of readers, and I think everyone else on the podcast loves, come directly from this run. And it is still so readable. George Perez's art is all-time great. It's beautiful. It goes on to be showcased in the Avengers run that Jason mentioned earlier. I could scream all day about how good the New Teen Titans is. I know there are some people who are going to think that it is not enough of a reboot, but for me,
I think it's definitely a revamp.
It impacts the most things that I love. So when we started this list, there was no way this was not going to be my number one. And there's some really gorgeous omnibuy that you can get now. So if you've never read it, highly, highly recommend.
Oh, man, that's a high bar. Mr. DJ.
Yes.
Can you clear it?
Can I clear it? Probably not. No, but I do. My true choice of a reboot/revamp is a team that is, especially in recent years, has become heavily associated with the Teen Titans.
Heck yeah.
And that is Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol run.
Good.
That's a great choice.
Yeah, because I just for like Christmas last year, I got the big omnibus of his run, and I just finished it like a couple months ago. And of course, love the show. Big fans of the characters.
The show is like truly so much better than it has any right to be. So good.
And it does such a good job of capturing what Grant Morrison is doing while making it palatable for general audiences while also not watering it down really, which I don't know how you accomplish that, because the book is so weird. It is so stupendously strange. But the only reason anybody would even know who the Doom Patrol is, this super obscure Z-list team of losers, is because of this run and because of the weird and wild imagination of Grant Morrison, and I believe it's Richard Case is his collaborator on most of the issues, and it is such a great use of that nobody's really captured. I think every time they try to bring Doom Patrol back, they try to make them somehow more mainstream. Give or take a Gerard Way, who did not try to do that. That it doesn't capture what made this team so unique. But what the show does is bring out that fact. Like, we, as lovers of the superhero genre, there are so many heroes or teams where it's like, is this power a gift or a burden? It's like, what? It's a gift. He's got super strength and he can swing on webs and climb up walls. It's a gift. Like, I don't know what you're trying to tell me. Like, it's
I know.
not,
you're like, I'll take it if you don't want it.
Yeah, if you're going to complain about it, like, give it to me. Whereas with the Doom Patrol, it legitimately, it's bad. Like, their quote unquote powers really are burns. Like, they suck. Like, no, you wouldn't wish this for the most part on your enemies. And seeing these people not only deal with that, but also handle stuff. Like, it's one thing to have Superman have to fight a fifth dimensional imp who is playing games with him. It's another thing when the Doom Patrol has to face what is it, the League of Dada, and a abstract cubist villain that is just trying to prove the fact that like nothing really matters and to make everything absurd. It's just a different wavelength. But if in a weird way, in a world where a man is powered by the sun and can fly, entities like this would be running around, and somebody would have to deal with them, and that just so happens to be the Doom Patrol. And it pushes what comics as a medium can do. It pushes, it just elevates, and it's of course right in that like British invasion where you've got Neil Gaiman and Sandman, and just an elevation of the medium. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And it's just a fantastic run and a fantastic retool of what these characters are that we are thankfully being gifted with continually now with the show, which is getting a third season.
I would also say it still stands today as the greatest Doom Patrol run. Like, no one has topped it. I
agree.
I know some people are fond of the Gerard way, but in my opinion, there's just no comparing to like the weirdness that Morrison can unleash on you.
Agreed.
All right, Jason, doubly high bar.
Well,
what are you going to clear it with for your number one?
I'm going to clear it with, of course, I think the most obvious choice, but this is sort of a twofer. Crisis on Infinite Earths, more so Man of Steel.
Okay.
Now, Crisis on Infinite Earths was the giant DC reboot. Basically, I know it's not the first comic book reboot, but it's the one that everybody thinks of when you think about comic book reboots.
It's the best one.
Because DC Comics had a huge multiverse. They had been publishing since 1938. They were sitting there in 1984. They were coming up on their big anniversary, and they realized that their continuity was a mess because there were Earth 1 through 1000, there were Earth A through Z, there were Earths with fractions, and no writer or reader could keep it straight anymore. So they decided, all right, we're going to spend 1985 and we're going to literally wipe out our entire multiverse, reducing it to one Earth. We're going to keep it simple for readers. Now, post that giant reboot where they were in a brand new multiverse, where there was no more multiverse, it was just Earth Prime, I believe.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Their designations of their Earths are really weird, but we're just going to go with Earth Prime because I know later it becomes New Earth, and then I think it becomes Earth Zero. Forget it. All right, so they had a brand new Earth. Unfortunately, they didn't reboot everybody like the New 52. Batman continued on like nothing had changed. So did the Justice League. So did the Flash. But Wonder Woman was relaunched from zero, and Superman was relaunched from zero. So that's where we're going to focus on Superman. Man of Steel, John Byrne's Man of Steel reboot of Superman is the greatest reboot of all time. And I'm going to tell you why. Not only had John Byrne gotten off one of the greatest X-Men runs of all time and the greatest Fantastic Four run of all time, but DC reached out to him and said, hey, would you reimagine Superman? So he relaunched Superman with this miniseries called Man of Steel that he wrote, drew, and he inked it.
NBD.
Huh?
I said no big deal.
Yeah, no big deal.
He wrote, drew, and inked it.
But he made some changes to Superman's continuity that had been like in continuity for years. Ma and Pa were both dead. He made them alive. Superman had thousands of Kryptonians that were running around. And this is, I think, the most important edict he changed. No Kryptonians except for Superman. Superman was the only one to survive. If any other Kryptonian shows up, they're either from an alternate timeline or something like that. But Superman is the only Kryptonian. He depowered Superman a little bit because Superman at that point was the person that could push planets. Yeah. He made Superman a person that could maybe push the moon if he had 8 hours sleep the night before. But that storyline, not only does he revamp Lois, this is the run that makes modern Lois a thing. Lois is every bit Superman and Lex Luthor's equal. He's the one, John Byrne's the one that makes Lex Luthor basically Donald Trump.
Yep.
Lex Luthor was not a businessman before this run. And all of these changes coalesced for me, and this is the reason why I picked this as my number one. This is my favorite Superman. My Superman is the John Byrne Superman, and on to the Dan Jurgens Superman, on to Infinite Crisis Superman. That is my Superman. On to Superman Rebirth. He becomes Superman Rebirth as well.
I was going to say that if anyone wanted a cross-section of what Jason thinks are the best elements in a Superman story, you're just like laying them out.
It is. It's Man of Steel.
Yeah.
I do. And if you listen to our episode about our Superman chronological timeline that we did a couple weeks ago with Cameron Cuff, my Superman timeline was based around this reboot.
Yes, and you're right. It leads into the one of the greatest modern Superman runs as well.
It does. And I think that every reboot since Man of Steel, even Ultimate Spider-Man, takes some pages back from John Byrne's 6-issue Man of Steel. It is, I think, the outline of how you do a reboot, because you have to think about Superman had been celebrating, it was getting close to celebrating his 50th anniversary when John Byrne did all these changes. And if John Byrne's changes had not worked, they would have thrown him off the book. It wouldn't have sold, but it did. Mm-hmm. It did work. And I think that led him into, again, a basic roadmap of how you can change a character, no matter how vaulted their history. And I would say anybody that is looking towards the future of rebooting any franchise, Star Trek, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, whatever you're going to do, would be remiss.
Don't you dare freaking touch Lord of the Rings.
I'm just saying, it doesn't matter. They would be remiss if they did not study in detail the 6-issue Man of Steel by John Byrne. And that's why I think it's the greatest comic book reboot of all time.
Very well said. I don't know if anyone's going to be able to argue with you on that.
Well, and also, like Superman the Animated Series, which for a whole generation
comes from this.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, so much of that storytelling to the point, and it was so integral to the point where I don't think I knew that Lex Luthor was a mad scientist at one point until well into my youth. Lex Luthor just was an evil businessman. That's just how I knew what he was.
Exactly. And it took until Smallville in 2000, 15 years later, for them to introduce the element that was always in Superman's origin story, or for most of the Silver Age at least, that the idea that Clark and Lex grew up together.
Yeah, you're welcome, Smallville.
Also, side note, Michael Rosenbaum's still my favorite Lex, probably.
That's a good choice. That's a good choice for Lex.
Just saying, he did a really good job.
I mean, it's between him and Clancy Brown? Realistically?
Realistically.
Yeah.
Realistically.
All right, everybody out there, there are our top 5 lists. I loved all our choices. I thought they were really great. If you want to hear more reboot talk, over at patreon.com/Jawiin, you go over there, you can support this free to you podcast and also get 5 exclusive podcasts a month. Also, you're going to hear a little bit more with DJ, where we're going to talk about the elements of a successful reboot and what we think a necessary reboot. We could even include revamp in there, but we're going to get deep into some writing and talk about, because we're all 3 comic book writers here. We're all 3 writers of many mediums, and we're going to pick our brains about what we think a successful reboot needs. And you can find that only on patreon.com/Jawiin. Now we're going to go into the recommended reading.
Yeah, so if you go over to geekhistorylesson.com/recommended reading, I am going to attempt to have one book from everything we talked about. I think I got our whole list down. If not, it will definitely be our top 3 choices. There's cute little Amazon widgets. You click on the ones you're interested in, you buy them, and you steal money from Jeff Bezos and put them in our pocket so we can keep the lights on here at the Mind University.
Yes, and now the final section of the podcast is the honor roll, which if you go over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review, you can write anything you want, and we'll read it on the air because you're bumping us up in the iTunes algorithm. So, Ashley, who's the one person that's going to make it into the honor roll this week?
Our addition to the honor roll this week is Ben Burnside, who says, this podcast is awesome to listen to while driving. Listen to this show for the first time in the review of the Sean Connery films. Ooh, a recent edition. And I thought it was awesome. Oddjob is easily my favorite James Bond character, so I'm very happy that he got some love here. He killed people with a hat and squished a golf ball, for God's sake. I love the trivia notes sprinkled into the episode. It really added something to the show. An awesome episode. Yay! Thank you, Ben Burnside. Welcome into the Teacher's Lounge. Professor Jason, what's going on in here today?
Well, many people may not know this, but guest professor and adjunct professor, Mr. DJ Wooldridge, has put a toy dinosaur in the corner because he teaches paleontology.
Oh, he does? I've heard that about him. Oh, I will say for the recommended reading, we're also going to put DJ's works in there as well. So if people think you're cool and you are, they should support him by checking out all of his great work.
Yes, and speaking of our excellent guest professor, DJ, where can everybody find you on social media? And you also do an amazing podcast that we have both guested on, so please tell them about that.
Yeah, you can find me everywhere that matters at DJ Talks Trash. You can find my show, Only Stupid Answers, everywhere podcasts are listened to. And that's going to be everywhere at Only Stupid Answers. But on Twitter, you're going to want to yank the vowels out of that. We've had some really cool episodes recently, including Jason and Ashley's coming up soon. A new episode there. And yeah, we got a ton of cool stuff. Go check it out.
Nice. Definitely go check out. I would consider it a sister podcast, The Geek History Lesson.
Agreed.
I was like cousins, definitely.
I think if you like DJ's podcast, you're going to like our podcast. If you like our podcast, I think you're going to like DJ's podcast. They're very similar in tone of just like very cool, chill people throwing out opinions about media and comic books. So Ashley, you can find her on Twitter and Instagram at Ashley V. Robinson. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Jawiin, Jawiin. And don't forget to follow this podcast on Twitter at GHL Podcast. Now, we're to the actual real end of this podcast. Hashtag stick around, where we see if you stuck around through the plugs. DJ.
Yes.
Is there a reboot / relaunch that none of us talked about that you thought we would have?
Not necessarily that you thought you would have, but there are a couple that I was going to put on my list.
Please throw them out.
One of them was the Tim Drake reboot of Robin, because he's still my favorite Robin.
It's because he's the greatest comic book character who's ever existed.
He is fantastic, and his design has become the de facto Robin design period forever since he was introduced. Again, I mentioned Thor earlier. Also, as we're talking about reboots, I also wanted to mention that there was a proposed Superman reboot called Superman 2000.
I remember that.
Proposed by Grant Morrison, Mark Waid, Mark Miller, and Tom Payer. That like you can find online, like their pitch, and it is amazing. And it's
I wish it had happened.
I agreed. It would have been incredible. I guess fortunately, because all these characters have written between like Superman Red Son, Superman Birthrights, All-Star Superman, all those ideas have kind of like leaked their way into other stories down the line. But the fact that all 4 of these writers were going to do something together, it bums me out. Like when you read through the pitch, you're like, oh, this would have been amazing.
The only thing I did not like in that revamp is that they were going to get rid of the Clark and Lois marriage.
Yes.
That was my only caveat about it, but I think everything else they were going to do, go Google this pitch, Superman 2000. It is one of those comic book revamps that you're like, oh my God, I wish this had happened.
Yeah. And even though I agree with you that like, I mean, they ended up dissolving the marriage. Now it's back again. But like, other than the fact they were going to dissolve the marriage, the way they came up with doing that without having to do like a full on reboot was pretty clever. Whether it was a good idea or not is up for debate. But like, at least the way they did it's like, well, it's better than One More Day. So.
And that's all you can say. Notice One More Day, not on anybody's list. And I think that it means we have no more minutes left for this podcast.
No Clone Saga either.
No, thank God. DJ, thank you so much for joining us on this episode.
Thank you for having me.
Listeners, thank you so much for listening. This has been Geek History Lesson on reboots. Hopefully we won't reboot before episode 500, but episode 500, all bets are off. I am Jason, possibly from another Earth, Inman.
I am Ashley Victoria Robinson, and Professor Jason, would you please dismiss the class?
Class is dismissed and rebooted.